Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my final fight breakdown, my final fight analysis, and my final fight prediction of the up and coming headliner, the up and coming pay per view card that is going to be on this weekend, I believe on Saturday, May 4th. I believe both on PBC's Amazon Prime and Matchroom's DAZN Boxing. So I believe that they'll be on both of those apps, whichever one you feel more comfortable with, or is going to be of the better product. But anyways, when it comes down to it, the fight, of course, that I'm going to be talking about is going to be that of the Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia fight. And just to kind of state this, because overall, before I really get into the breakdown, one thing overall that I'm starting to notice about this generation, because for those of you overall that have watched my channel, and maybe seen enough of my videos, you know that I'm within my mid 20s and I'm 26 years old. And I think that every generation eventually has to deal with this, especially when, they grow up and and overall they end up watching and growing up, certain athletes pretty much rise and, grow in the stars before their very eyes. Canelo Alvarez was one of those athletes that when I was in my mid teenage years, I really didn't know where he was going to go. At that time, Canelo Alvarez, there was talks about him fighting Gennady Golovkin. Of course, he had lost to Mayweather, but I had seen his fights against Lara. I'd seen his fights against Alfredo Ngulu. I'd seen his fight against Miguel Cotto. I'd seen his fight against James Kirkland. I'd seen his fight overall, as a lot of his fights. I've seen pretty much all of his fights pretty much ever since from 2013 onwards. Canelo Alvarez was one of those athletes that I ended up growing up with. But what I'm noticing throughout not just boxing, but a certain amount of other sports is that you're starting to notice a new guard arise. When I take a look at NFL football, football for a little bit there didn't feel quite the same as when I watched it. And eventually I started realizing because none of the quarterbacks that I ended up growing watching, that's brought the excitement because you were always wondering what else they would add to their career. They're no longer around. Drew Brees is no longer around. Tom Brady has retired. Peyton Manning is gone. Big Ben Roethlisberger is gone. And some of the other guys, Eli Manning is no longer around and playing. When you talk about NBA basketball, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, even Stephen Curry, they're still there, but you can tell that at least 3 out of 4 of those players that they don't really have the same level of impact anymore, other than really Stephen Curry, and of course even his team. They're really only kept afloat by that of Stephen Curry. Earlier this year, when I took a look at Novak Djokovic, in the Australian Open, I knew that he was not going to beat Jannik Sinner. And against Jannik Sinner, he had probably one of the most sloppiest and worst performances that I had ever seen Novak Djokovic have. But, a lot of people, of course, would say that, oh, it's because he didn't play enough. But in my view, Novak Djokovic, when I took a look at him in that series or in that match against Jannik Sinner, once again, it looked like a changing of the guard. It looked like a guy that was facing overall a person that was a younger version of himself or was a guy that clearly it was his time to win. And Djokovic looked like basically his best years were behind him. He had no legs behind him within that match. And I thought that he was already showing symptoms of age in last year when he won 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams. But the point is that overall, there's always a certain amount of factors that go in whenever it comes to sports. There's been a person, I believe, that always comments or, he kind of asked me that, oh, I bet this amount of money. Do you ever bet a certain amount of money? Do you ever overall get excitement from betting on fights, of a fighter that you believe is absolutely going to win? And I always tell people this, that I never bet money on any particular sport because especially within that of the fight game, you never know what is going to happen. Now, why do I bring all this up? I bring this up because Canelo Alvarez, in my personal view, when you've taken a look at him within his past few fights, you can tell that Canelo Alvarez is still an A-grade fighter, and in my view, one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters, and that he's still a very big threat to anyone he's going to fight. But I think that Canelo Alvarez, I think even he knows that his time is starting to come to an end. Canelo Alvarez, yes, he's only 34 years old, but Canelo Alvarez has a lot of tread on those tires. Canelo Alvarez is 34 years old this year, I believe. He's been fighting professionally for 19 years. And it's not like Canelo Alvarez has just been in these weak-ass fights. For the past decade, there probably isn't another fighter that has had the amount of A-grade level fights or the resume overall that Canelo Alvarez has had. And to be honest with you, I don't know if it's even relatively close. So the question is that, who do I believe is going to win the fight? I believe more than likely that Canelo Alvarez, that he's going to be savvy enough, that he's going to be intelligent enough, and that overall more than likely that he's going to be skilled enough to beat that Jaime Munguia. But to be honest with you, I'm going to give Jaime Munguia at the very least a 30% chance to possibly win this fight because he is very dangerous. Now, is he a kid that's very technically flawed? Is he a kid that, overall, he clearly, could use a little bit more in terms of the boxing IQ department or the defensive department? Does he overextend a lot of his punches? Is he a guy that, in my view, is a little bit inexperienced compared to Canelo or wet behind the ears? Yeah, certainly. But it is going to be interesting because you don't really know where Canelo Alvarez is going to be at this point in time in his career continuing forward. Because when certain athletes drop off, it can just happen within the snap of a finger. It can happen overall really within an instant. Once again, when I see Novak Djokovic this year against Yannick Sinner, he looked like a completely different player. When I seen overall, certain other players, in the NFL, like Drew Brees' last season, he looked completely different. When Peyton Manning was in his last season, he looked terrible, completely different, completely 360 than what he was even in his last season. And when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, I haven't seen that complete 360 yet, but I think that eventually it might potentially get there. But I think that Canelo Alvarez, once again, that he's going to try to let this ride right out as much as possible. And I think that instead of getting in the ring with a David Benavidez immediately, I think overall that he's going to try to let this ride right out a little bit more because I think that Canelo Alvarez even realizes himself that his end is coming soon. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's state overall what Stephen A. Smith had to say. This is going to be a video reviewed by that of ESPN First Take. Let's get into it. Let's see what they have to say.
Canelo Alvarez will defend all 4 of his super middleweight titles this Saturday at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. He already holds the record for most successful undisputed title defenses in the 4-belt era with 3. Stephen A., take it away.
So much proud to be here with Canelo Alvarez, one of the best in the business. This fight against Jaime Munguia. Why Munguia? Why are you fighting this guy this Saturday night, Canelo?
I always say I don't want to buy Mexico again, but sometimes you need to do it. I represent Mexico. That's what I feel. But sometimes you need to do it, and I think Jaime Munguia is doing good things, and it's good for Mexico. For the first time, 2 Mexicans fighting the 4 belts, and everybody's watching us Saturday night. So I feel proud about it.
I'm going to be interested to see how well this fight really does in terms of the pay-per-view numbers. Because to be honest, I could see this fight doing anywhere from 200,000 to only 350,000 to all the way up to 800,000. I wouldn't really be surprised if it does any of those numbers because this, of course, is not the fight that everybody wanted to see. Everybody pretty much wanted to see David Benavidez versus Canelo Alvarez. I still do think that this is a very exciting fight and that it's an acceptable fight. But I don't know how many people are going to be willing to pay for it, especially because I don't really know how great of an undercard this actually is. But of course, Canelo Alvarez, he always, attracts certain names. So I assume more than likely that it's probably going to at least do 250,000 to 350,000. But if I'm wrong about that, we'll see what ends up happening there. Could even be higher because Jaime Munguia does have a very big, large Mexican fan base following. And I think that a lot of the Mexican fan base may tune into this, but we'll see what ends up happening here.
When people look at you right now, there's no denying that you're one of the best in the world. Do you consider yourself the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet right now? And if so, why?
Steve, I always feel I'm the best.
Well, of course, Canelo Alvarez is going to feel that he's the best fighter in the world, as he should. And Canelo Alvarez, in certain respects, if we're also going to go there, he deserves overall to at least be in the conversation as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. He's had a great amount of accomplishments. His only recent loss is against a guy that clearly probably was bigger than him. And on top of that, one of the potential top 10 pound-for-pound fighters in the world against Dimitri Bivol. And to be honest, you can argue that Canelo still won some rounds within that fight. Like about 3 to 4 rounds within that fight. I think I gave him about 4. But anywhere from there. So the fact that he still probably gave Bivol overall the toughest fight of his career, Even compared to the cruiserweight Gilberto Soto Ramirez, at least basically a cruiserweight, shows you a lot about the skill set of a Canelo Alvarez. But like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he's been a little bit on the decline now for the past few years. I think that the last great performance that he had was against Caleb Plant. I thought he looked very fresh and very great there. And then, of course, against Dimitri Bivol, he didn't look quite the same to me. But I thought that at first that, I was like, oh, well, maybe Canelo, maybe he just stepped up a little bit too much in weight, because Canelo, in my view, is really not even a natural 168 pounder. He's really more of a, in the middle of a 168 pounder and 160 pounder, in my view, really closer to 160, in my view, because he's 5'7" with the 71-inch arm reach. But, when it comes down to it, against Bivol, of course, we've seen Canelo Alvarez get beat pretty thoroughly. But I said, you know what? I think he gained a little bit too much muscle mass because he didn't have really great stamina there. But then afterwards, of course, I seen him, I believe, against Gennady Golovkin in the trilogy match. And, I thought that he clearly outboxed Gennady Golovkin. And Golovkin, of course, was not the same fighter as what he once was. Nowhere near. But to be honest with you, Canelo Alvarez didn't appear to be the same fighter as he once was either. When it came down to he looked slower, he looked more lethargic. And even in his next fight against John Ryder, he looked even worse. So people are talking about that Canelo Alvarez, that, oh, he's not training, he's drinking and all sort of stuff. And who knows, maybe that could be the case. But I just don't know if I believe the fact that Canelo's not training. I just think that Canelo Alvarez, I just think that he's getting old. Now once again, he's 34 years old, but Canelo's been in some big fights. And this is going to be almost year 20 for Canelo Alvarez.
Was amateur, I feel like was the best.
And of course, he was very good and fresh against Jamel Charlo. But I mean, even Canelo in that fight, to be quite honest with you, he looked about 85% of what he was really at his best. I don't think that, we're ever going to see the absolute peak or best version of Canelo Alvarez again. And it's understandable because he's getting up there. He's getting up there. He has over 60 fights in his career. He's a guy that has fought a multitude of A-grade fighters within his career. He's been in some wars, when it comes down to it. And he's been within, 4 or 5 different weight divisions. So we'll see overall what ends up happening. But like I stated, you can tell when, some people, and it doesn't always hit you immediately, but you can tell sometimes if you've watched it after a while when a guy is starting to slow down. In boxing, their legs may get a little bit slower. They may not have the same foot speed. They may start to get hit a little bit more. They may not be able to get to the punch, quite as quick as what they once were. They may not be able to counter as fast as what they once did or get to the target as quick as what they did. They might be looking for easier exchanges or they might be looking overall for easier targets, which may make their offense a little bit more one-dimensional because they believe that they cannot do what they once did on the same level. And I'm not stating that Canelo, once again, is a one-dimensional fighter right now, even in a little bit of his older age. But I think that in that Jamel Charlo fight, and maybe it was just because he was really trying to hurt Jamel Charlo or he felt like he didn't really need to pull anything out of the pocket for Jamel Charlo, because I've always stated that Jamel, in my view, even though he's a decent fighter, he's not a guy that is ever, in my view, a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. Never was. The LDBC and new media tried to push him up as this guy overall that, he was in the deepest division of boxing. All sort of bullshit. And then as soon as Canelo whooped Jamel Charlo's ass, we don't hear anything about Jamel Charlo anymore from the LDBC and new media.
So I feel I'm the best, and I wanna feel it every day. So I feel I'm the best, and I just try to do the best fights out there. And if you see my resume, I did everything in the sport of boxing, and I feel proud about it, and I feel the best, yes.
I think when I look at you, I've only been critical of one thing because I know how great you are. I'm a guy that wants desperately to see you versus David Benavidez. That is not somebody that you have shown an interest in.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, there's probably some other things you can be critical as well over Canelo Alvarez, such as that incident, I believe, all the way back in 2018 or whenever it was that Canelo, of course, was caught on that, tainted Mexican meat, allegedly. But, of course, you can't bring that up because Canelo Alvarez will walk out on the interview on your ass.
Fighting as of yet. He's a former 2-time WBC champion, beat Caleb Plant and got the interim title back. He lost it out of the ring twice, but he's undefeated. He's a super middleweight, and you haven't fought him yet. Why not?
If you
Well, David Benavidez, of course, fought at the super middleweight division, but let the record also show that David Benavidez is not really a super middleweight fighter. David Benavidez is a dude that really is a cruiserweight in disguise. David Benavidez is absolutely a weight bully at that weight class. Now, that is not me stating that Canelo Alvarez should have not fought him or should have not tried harder to make that fight, but David Benavidez is a big dude. And I think that Canelo Alvarez realizes that David Benavidez, that dude overall is going to be a huge threat, not just in terms of some of the things that he brings to the table in skill, but he's also humongous. Like, David Benavidez would be several inches taller than Canelo Alvarez. He'd have real level power, real level speed. When it comes down to it, he'd be at the very least 2 pounds, if not even more, bigger than that of Canelo Alvarez, So I think overall 2 weight classes bigger, So I think that Canelo Alvarez, that if he's going to fight Benavidez, to be honest with you, it seems like Canelo Alvarez that he wants this ride to last as long as possible. So I think that he'll probably fight guys like Jaime Munguia, Jamal Charlo, maybe some other guys, possibly Edgar Berlanga. Guys that might be memorable fights or fights that people might look at as good fights potentially, but I don't know if we're going to see Canelo Alvarez in the ring to where we really think overall that, he can beat overall or can be beat by that guy possibly, unless it's possibly the last fight of his career. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, of course, he stated that he possibly wants to go back up to the light heavyweight division. I think that Canelo Alvarez might take a couple more fights at the 168-pound weight class, possibly after this year, and I think he's going to try to wait to maybe see who's the undisputed champion at 175 pounds, whether it's Bivol or Benavidez, and I think that he may plan to potentially fight the winner of the unified light heavyweight championship, because at least then Canelo Alvarez would have a little bit of a shortcut, and there'd be something majorly in it for him, and it'd be the max amount of cash if he can fight the winner overall, of the undisputed titles at the 175-pound weight class. And then, of course, that would, kind of, not erase the Bivol loss, but, of course, it would make people overall, look at Canelo in a redeemed form.
See, the history of my career is always somebody there. Mm-hmm. Before was Golovkin, before was Erislandy Lara, Trow, then Carlos Smith, Saunders, Caleb Plant, a lot of fighters, and you don't put attention. Not especially you, the people always.
And once again, Billy Joe Saunders and Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, they're about the same level as Demetrius Bubo Andrade, and certainly on the same level, if not even slightly above Jamal Charlo, and both the Charlo brothers. All right, it is what it is. Like I've had certain people state that, Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, those guys were A-grade wins. And there was a guy the other day that actually stated that, well, to be fair, I also don't count Demetrius Andrade or the Charlo brothers as A-grade fighters either. A fighter that steps up in class almost every single time and loses, in my view, is not an A-grade level fighter. Well, it depends over on what you mean. If we're talking about a fighter like Adrian Broner, then I would tend to agree with you, where I can't state that he's an A-grade level fighter because basically every time he gets in the ring against an A-grade level fighter, he gets absolutely dominated. But if we're talking about some other guys to where they get in the ring against A-grade level fighters, like if we take a look at Sean Porter, for example, Sean Porter, in my view, yeah, he lost a lot of the bigger fights in his career, but in my view, he was an A-grade level fighter. Probably A-, but, he probably was A-grade. Same with Danny Garcia, because Danny was still able to beat Amir Khan. He was still able to beat Robert Guerrero, Lucas Matisse, some of the other guys there, Lamont Peterson. When you take a look at Sean Porter, he was able to defeat Danny Garcia. He was able to defeat a couple of other decent names, Devin Alexander, Paulie Malignaggi at one point in time, and a couple of other names that, Adrian Broner. But he just couldn't ever beat the best of that weight class, like Keith Thurman or, that of Terrence Crawford or Earl Spence Jr. or Kell Brook. So, I understand where people are coming from. Like, if you're a guy that can't beat any A-grade possible names, like an Adrian Broner, then yeah, you're a B-grade level fighter. But Caleb Plant, in my view, Billy Joe Saunders, Andrade, Jamal Charlo, those are guys that, in my view, that they're all A- level fighters. I have those guys within the same realm overall, basically. And if we're going to go to the LDBC and new media narrative about how Caleb Plant, and Billy Joe Saunders were not A-grade level fighters, and Callum Smith, at least on the A- level, but Andrade and Jamal Charlo were, just because basically they're black American fighters. Keep in mind overall that Caleb Plant, that he gave David Benavidez probably the toughest fight so far in his career, at least when you talk about him being at his peak level. Because Caleb Plant, at the very least, in my view, won 4, possibly even 5 rounds against David Benavidez, and he didn't even get dropped once. Now, the ref did intervene probably a little bit too much overall, but Caleb Plant still showed a very tough fight. Of course, he wasn't able to adjust enough overall, in that David Benavidez fight, but he still gave him a very tough fight. And, there was conversation about how Andrade was supposed to be 10 times better, than that of, what's his name, Caleb Plant. And then Demetrius Andrade won about 2.5 rounds. And then after that, he completely tired out. And then he got his ass kicked for the rest of that fight. Couldn't even go past 6 rounds.
Say something about, I don't want to fight this guy, I don't want to fight this guy. And I fight all of them at that time. So, and you don't put attention in the fighter I have in front. To put the respect the fighter I have in front, like I put the respect in the fighter I have in Saturday night. If the fight don't happen with Benavidez, he's not gonna fight. It's not gonna happen. So we'll see in the future, but you need to put attention in this fight.
Well,
right, Canelo Alvarez, but you're kind of dancing around the David Benavidez question. So it is what it is. I mean, we can go behind this thing about, oh, well, I fought everyone in my career, so I should be able to do whatever I want to do. All that is well and good, Mr. Canelo Alvarez. But at the end of the day, if you're in professional boxing, and if you're looked at as one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters, you're going to have to continue facing the best of the best level of competition. And right now, David Benavidez is the fight that everyone's calling for. Now, if Canelo Alvarez just comes out and states that, you know what, I really don't want to fight David Benavidez because that dude is pretty much a light heavyweight in disguise. He's not really a natural 168 pounder, and I think that I can make other fights at 168. I wouldn't really quite mind it as much, But overall, once again, I think that it's clear that Canelo, that he finds Benavidez to be a threat.
I'm looking at this fight, and one of the reasons, again, this is where I think your greatness could be held against you, because even though Jaime Munguia is undefeated and he's considered a really, really good fighter, most people look at him and they say, he ain't Canelo. How much of a chance are we supposed to give him against this great Saul Canelo Alvarez? So when you look at it from that...
I agree with that, but let me just state this very quickly. Like I said, when fighters drop off or when athletes drop off, it can happen literally within an instant. So like I stated, Canelo Alvarez, in my view, has already been aging really for the past 3 years. He's looked slower. He doesn't look like he's as quick to the punch. He doesn't look like he has in much of his art or as much as what he once did in his arsenal anymore. I could be wrong, but we'll see. I still believe that Canelo Alvarez will beat Jaime Munguia, because just to talk about Jaime Munguia quickly, he's a relatively talented fighter, definitely a big puncher. Someone that, of course, is very athletically gifted, but I just think that he's going to be a little bit too hittable. I think that his defense more than likely is going to be lacking a little bit too much within the fight. And if he does get hurt, or if he hurts his opponent, or starts getting good hits, and sometimes it's a little bit hard for him to stay back and, kind of be technical. Jaime Munguia is a guy to where once he hurts you, or if he gets certain hits on you, sometimes he gets going a little bit too crazy. Now, against John Ryder, he definitely showed some improvement within that fight, but Canelo's going to be a completely different story if Canelo is still the same fighter that I seen in that last Jamel Charlo fight. So we'll see overall what ends up happening here. But I'm going to give Jaime Munguia a 30% chance to possibly win this fight because, first of all, I don't think Jaime Munguia is a bad fighter. I think that he's about an A- level fighter. I do think that he's technically flawed compared to Canelo Alvarez especially. And I think that in terms of big fights that he's a little bit inexperienced. And when I state that, certain people will say, what are you talking about? Jaime Munguia is 43-0, right? But also when it comes to, like I've always stated about the Mayweather and Canelo example, I'm not a person that, overall ever really uses the excuse about Mayweather only beat Canelo Alvarez because Canelo Alvarez was way too green and all this sort of stuff. I never really have stated that. But what I will state is that, Mayweather of the two definitely was the more experienced of the two fighters. And certain people will say, what are you talking about? Canelo Alvarez, overall was 40-something and 0. How can you state that Canelo Alvarez, that experience played a factor there? Because Canelo Alvarez, at that time, he was pretty much fed a bunch of fighters overall to get his way to the top. Some fighters, of course, that, probably were decently good. But Mayweather had been in so many elite level caliber fights. And when you talk about guys like Mayweather, guys like Pacquiao, guys like Canelo at this current moment in time, when they finally get in the ring overall with those young bucks, a lot of the times experience and the confidence overall and the pressure that is put off their shoulders because they've been there, because they've done that, and they fought a lot of different styles, and they already know what to kind of do. And they, a lot of the times it's just going through the motions, in a very, calm way. Of course, that can be a clear advantage for them. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that it's an unfair advantage necessarily, but it just means that it's definitely going to be an edge, in my view, for Canelo Alvarez. So Jaime Munguia, yeah, he might have 43 fights, on his record, but they've really been against a bunch of guys that really are nowhere near on the caliber that Canelo Alvarez has really fought, at least in his biggest fights. And it was kind of the same thing with Canelo and Mayweather, in my view, where Canelo, he was the young up-and-coming bull, and of course, certain people could debate that, if he was great enough that he could have defeated that Floyd Mayweather Jr., but Floyd also had been in just a lot of mega fights that would have given him a lot of confidence and experience within that fight. Such as Miguel Cotto, Oscar De La Hoya, overall, Robert Guerrero, I believe at that time. I thought that he fought Robert Guerrero before Canelo, but I'd have to remember, overall, Jose Luis Castillo, Juan Manuel Marquez, Sugar Shane Mosley. So, Floyd, is a guy, to where, once again, when it comes to those experience level fighters, it can be very hard to beat them unless you're just an exceptional talent.
Perspective, what do you say to those people who may be critical of this being the fight simply because they consider you so great that they don't consider him on your level?
They the hater is always wanna hate. They always wanna say something. They always wanna say something. They wanna criticize my opponents, no matter what. And I don't.
Well, I agree with you, Canelo Alvarez. Such as the LDBC and new media, they definitely will criticize your opponents no matter what. But at the end of the day, Canelo, you do realize that David Benavidez is the biggest fight potentially out there for you. But you realize that he's a very big threat right now, and that in order to possibly have that fight happen, there has to be a little bit more in it for you.
Pay attention on that.
And that means probably both titles and money.
I know Jaime Munguia is a great fighter. This fight is a great fight for Mexico. And I'm happy with that.
My question to you is, how much influence has Floyd Money Mayweather had on your approach to your boxing career because he was so gifted at knowing how to make money fights? You're that guy too, to some degree. You're definitely...
I think that Floyd Mayweather Jr. has had a great influence on really a lot of careers, and especially on Canelo Alvarez's career. I think that Canelo Alvarez has used certain tactics and done certain things within his career in order to grow his fan base, in order to, overall with some of the fights that, of course he has given certain people. I think that, he is very similar to Mayweather in certain tactics that he does, in terms of growing his fan bases, in terms of fighting people, from a lot of different countries, whether it be Britain or, whether it be Mexico, whether it be Cuba, whether it be Kazakhstan or, Europe or, some of the other places. Canelo Alvarez, of course, making himself the cash cow. When it comes down, I think that Canelo has been very influenced by Mayweather.
About that as well, not just fighting, but getting paid well to do it. How much, if any, influence at all has Floyd Mayweather's approach affected you in choosing the fights you have chosen?
You need to learn from everybody. You need to learn from everybody.
Agreed. I've always agreed with that sentiment. A lot of people, they get a little bit too arrogant or big for their britches, and they believe that, even if someone is lesser than them, they believe that just because someone is lesser than them, that they can't learn something overall from that person. Or, some people overall, they don't want to learn from someone that is probably more experienced than them or possibly even better or sharper in that area, overall because of pride. At the end of the day, we as human beings, we can learn from almost every situation and everybody, whether it be good or negative.
End of the day, he's one of the best in the history of boxing for something, because he fight with the best fighters out there, and I'm doing the same thing. And I say in my mind, the people asking for so much, the people asking for this, and I always do what they want, and why I don't need to ask for something, I deserve what I have because I sacrifice myself. I put discipline in front. I put everything on my side to be in this position, and I deserve what I have.
You fought as a middleweight. You're the super middleweight champion. You fought you won a light heavyweight championship. What do you consider yourself at this moment in time? Like, are you staying at super middleweight? Are you planning on going down, staying there?
I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is going to go back down to 160 because when you start to get up there in age and when you start to overall get a little bit more wear and tear, it's even harder to lose that weight overall than what it once was. Unless you're someone like a Floyd Mayweather, who really only rehydrates to about 150 pounds or somewhere around there. But Canelo Alvarez, he's a big, dude, at least in terms of stockiness. He can rehydrate at about 180 to 185. Of course, Canelo, in my view, is kind of more of a middleweight than what he really is a super middleweight. But I just don't see him moving down to that weight. He's really grown into the super middleweight class, in my view. I think that if there's ever going to be a weight change, it'll probably move up one weight class.
Going back.
And if that does happen, in my view, Canelo Alvarez is going to have to kind of somewhat keep his super middleweight frame because gaining too much muscle mass, in my view, it's just going to cause the same exact effect that happened in the Dimitri Bivol fight. Canelo already has great power. In my view, what you really want to keep is the greatest amount of stamina and conditioning possible, overall, as well as the speed, whatever you have left.
Back up. What's the future for Canelo Alvarez as a fighter in terms of the division you choose to fight in?
I don't know if it's something good for me in other division. I can go to other division. I like that challenge, and if something really good in other division, I will go for sure. But
a fight that I would actually really love to see is a Janibek fight. I would love to see overall Canelo Alvarez versus Janibek.
Right now I'm focused 100% on Munguia, but it's always something good for me in the future.
To be a part of Nebraska Medicine is to be a part of something extraordinary.
Nebraska Medicine, how may I help you?
Because these are the doors that open doors to an academic experience, a life experience.
It's always something good for me in the future.
Munguia, this Saturday night, what are you expecting this fight to be like? Highlight it for me. What does he bring to the table? And what do you think you have to do to take him out?
Well, before Canelo Alvarez answers, just to finally talk about the Jaime Munguia situation. Munguia is going to be bigger. He's going to be taller. I believe he's going to be lengthier. He's going to be a guy that packs a wallop. He packs a great punch. And he's a kid that, of course, is undefeated. He's probably coming in here with a certain amount, a level of confidence. And, of course, he's getting better and more technical throughout every single fight. But I do believe that, obviously, that Canelo Alvarez is the better fighter between the two. But like I said, we'll see overall how much Canelo Alvarez has still aged overall from the year to the year. It's going to be interesting. But in order for Jaime Munguia, in my view, to really stand a chance within this fight, he's going to have to throw a decent amount, because if he tries to be as technical as possible against Canelo Alvarez, I just don't know if that's really going to work. Now, Munguia is kind of, in a troubling situation, because you also don't really want to brawl against Canelo Alvarez, because Canelo Alvarez has excellent power. He's a guy that has excellent body work as well as excellent head work throughout a fight. He's a guy that has extraordinary power, excellent counterpunching ability, and he has great defense. But Jaime Munguia, in my view, what he's really going to have to use, he's going to have to use a very disciplined jab. Don't always just walk in there and try to land the jab every single time, but try to parry Canelo Alvarez, try to set him up a little bit, go to the body a little bit early, use your feet, and just try to stay out, of the mid-range, or use your feet, use angles as much as possible. Because if you try to outbox Canelo Alvarez within the mid-range the whole entire time, there's a very big possibility that Canelo Alvarez is going to outbox him, and somewhat thoroughly, or overall, even potentially hurt him. Some, of course, are predicting Canelo Alvarez to get the knockout, and that's very possible because Jaime Munguia is a kid that gets a little bit too reckless. He gets a little bit too thirsty sometimes for blood in the knockout, and he has a very, very, very bad habit, of overextending his punches. But we'll see what happens.
He throw a lot of punches. He's a strong fighter. He have a good boxing IQ. But whether
well, he has good boxing ability to a certain degree. I'm not really sure how high of a boxing IQ he actually has.
As long the fight gone, I don't know if it's gonna go down. I don't want it. I think I'm gonna finish under 8 rounds, but it's gonna be a good fight. it's gonna be a good fight because he throw a lot of punches. He's young. He's a good fighter, but I don't know how many rounds he's gonna go the fight, but it's gonna be a good fight.
So. All right, you.
And Canelo Alvarez, of course, recently stated overall, as you heard him right there, that he's going to try to stop him with about 8 rounds or less. Do I believe that that's going to happen? You never know, because Canelo Alvarez might see certain openings that, maybe overall that other fighters in the past did not. And Canelo, of course, is great at seeing openings. He's an excellent counterpuncher, and he's an excellent defensive fighter at his best. But it's going to be interesting because could Canelo Alvarez possibly finally get hit with something that eventually is going to hurt him? Now, for Canelo Alvarez, probably for any other all-time great fighter that I've watched, whether it be an older fighter that wasn't, of my generation growing up or, of the current fighters, Canelo might have the greatest chin that I've ever seen out of any other all-time great fighter. Other than maybe Marvin Hagler or Gennady Triple G Golovkin. Like, when you talk about the greatest chins of all time for all-time great fighters, like, it's probably those three.
So you.
Who are, interestingly enough, all kind of middleweight fighters.
And that Munguia, he's going out before 8 rounds. Is that correct? You gonna take him out before 8?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
What if the public craves and demands that your next fight?
And Canelo Alvarez is going to have to use his feet within this fight as well. Now, Canelo Alvarez hasn't always had the best feet. They can be a little bit slow, and sometimes, a little bit clunky at times. But Canelo Alvarez, he does use his feet to move in and outside of the range when he needs to. Canelo is also going to have to use his feet because if Canelo Alvarez just plods forward in this fight, overall and doesn't use his feet quite as much, kind of like what I thought he did in the Jamel Charlo fight, because Jamel, in terms of his boxing ability, just stood no chance whatsoever. Then Canelo could potentially lose some rounds here, or he could be in a little bit of trouble. So we'll see. But I expect Canelo Alvarez to fight smart within this fight, but we'll see what happens. So Canelo is going to have to move in and outside of the range here and there as well. Don't be afraid to throw the jab. You're going to have to wait for some of Jaime Munguia's punches. You can get him to overextend. But Canelo, one thing I will state is this. He's going to have to be careful with that lead left hook. Because Freddie Roach actually brought up something overall that was interesting to where he stated that Canelo, a lot of the times when he ends up throwing that lead left hook, which he likes to throw a lot, which in certain situations, most of the time, you're really not supposed to throw unless you're fast enough or unless you have the right opportunity. Canelo Alvarez, of course, drops his right hand in order for the left hook to be faster. Well, if Canelo Alvarez ends up missing that, he could potentially get hit with something, whether it be an overhand right, or right over the top, or whether it be a left hook overall by Jaime Munguia, if Canelo Alvarez potentially misses, or if it's thrown at the same time. So we'll see.
Is David Benavidez? You open to doing that?
We'll see. Why not? If the money is correct, why not? I can fight him Saturday night too.
Saturday night too. So you think you you
Yeah, Canelo Alvarez, I would like to see that one. You'd fight Benavidez overall on Saturday night, but you're asking for $200 million. Now, don't get me wrong, of course. I don't mind Canelo Alvarez asking for the money, but let's let's stop overall with the I'll fight David Benavidez under any circumstances stuff. At the end of the day, Canelo, I don't mind you getting your money. I don't mind you overall taking the time with the Benavidez fight, but at the end of the day, let's not sit here and act like you've been trying to fight David Benavidez just under any circumstances.
think you'll beat him up too. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, of course. Of course, I beat that guy. If the money is the money is that correct? I fight that guy and I beat that guy the same night.
Jake Paul is about to fight Mike Tyson. How do you feel about that? As a champion in the world of boxing, how do you feel about that fight happening?
Steve, I don't have problem with that.
Neither do I. To be honest with you, actually, I think it's going to do very great in terms of the pay-per-view buys. I think a lot of people are going to be wondering who really is going to win that fight. Now, of course, a lot of people would say, well, of course it's going to be Mike Tyson. And of course, Mike Tyson, even at his age, still probably has a decent amount of skills and is a very big threat, especially even to the average man. But, overall, but Jake Paul, he has been in training for a little bit, and he is way younger. And I really don't know where Mike Tyson's conditioning level really is at. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Anybody can make money the way they want, and I don't have any problem with that. So they can do whatever they want to make money, and it's fine.
They can do whatever they want to make money, and You know, if Jake Paul ends up winning, then I'll go in and I'll make millions.
But
You
you
don't
need
fight you.
to, you need,
Go.
but you need to know that fight is is for my money. That's it.
Agreed.
You need to put in your mind. You like a fan or whatever. You wanna watch entertaining, no a fight. That's it.
But anyways, that's pretty much overall about it. Overall for this video, just to kind of finally break it down overall in the last couple of sections. Once again, what do I believe is going to happen within the fight? I believe that Canelo Alvarez is more than likely going to win this fight by unanimous decision. That's what I'm going to predict. I assume that Canelo is at least going to win this fight 8 rounds to 4, if not even a little bit tighter. Now, if Canelo ends up winning this fight, overall probably like 12 rounds to 0 or 11 rounds to 1. Canelo would be probably at a little bit of a better spot than what I think that he is. Because, I was expecting that against Jamel Charlo. Jaime Munguia, in my view, is a bigger threat than what Jamel Charlo is. And once again, I don't think the weight was as much of an excuse as what people were trying to state that it is, because really both Canelo and Jamel Charlo, they're really both comparable in size, even in terms of the weight, because Jamel Charlo really is not a guy that should be fighting at 154 pounds anyway, but, it is what it is. But Jaime Munguia, it's going to be interesting to see what he does. He's going to have to be very careful. He's going to have to be very sharp. He's going to have to use his jab, use his feet overall to get around Canelo Alvarez. Always throw at angles. Do not be afraid to throw to the body. Try to really intimidate Canelo Alvarez. Overall, don't stay up along the ropes up against Canelo Alvarez. Be careful in the mid-range. Always keep the right hand up. Don't overextend, or try as hard not to overextend. Parry, set Canelo up, try to feint on him, go to the body as early as possible, and really just use your feet to move in and outside of the range. Use that jab, but you don't have to hit him with it every single time. Be careful not to just completely go in and overall every single time try to go for the shot and get countered by Canelo, because I promise you, Canelo still has raw power, and it's going to hurt if Jaime Munguia gets hit flush. So Munguia has to be careful that he doesn't get knocked down multiple times throughout this fight or potentially even stopped. As for Canelo Alvarez, Jaime Munguia, even though he's talented, he's not the most technically, gifted fighter in the world. He will make mistakes. You can get through his high guard. You can overall get through the mid-range, because a lot of his exchanges are 50-50 level exchanges. And a lot of the times, he does not return his hands up to where they need to be, at least in certain times. He's not the fastest fighter that I've ever seen. But of course, he's also not super slow either. He's got some speed. He's just not quite as quick as some of the other fighters that I've seen necessarily. But at times he can be defensively irresponsible. He can get wild, and if Canelo Alvarez can rough him up a little bit early, more than likely we're going to see a little bit more recklessness from that of Jaime Munguia, or him possibly retreat, one of the two options. But if I had to guess, we'll probably see Jaime Munguia probably get a little bit reckless, because that's usually what he does, whenever he's in trouble or when he has an opponent in trouble. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But it'll be interesting, because Canelo is going to have a completely different level of power than whatever he has ever felt. So it's going to be particularly interesting. But I do predict Canelo to win this by unanimous decision. If he ended up stopping that on Jaime Munguia, it'd be pretty impressive, because I don't expect Canelo Alvarez to knock out Jaime Munguia. I wouldn't be shocked if it happened, but I just think with Canelo Alvarez's age at the current moment in time, that more than likely it's probably more safe, if I were a betting man, that Canelo Alvarez win by decision. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. And if Canelo were to lose this fight, what I'll state is this: I want to be shell-shocked. I'd be a little bit surprised, but I want to be shell-shocked, because you just never know at this point in time in his career. So we'll see. But, it's going to be very interesting. As for Canelo and Munguia, they're both going to have to move their feet. In my view, Canelo Alvarez, we all know that his defense is superb. Overall, in his best fights, or in his best performances. It's going to be interesting to see if this is more of a mid-range fight, or where Canelo Alvarez tries to stalk and really break the fighter down. It'll be interesting, but we'll see overall what ends up happening. And as for Canelo, in my view, it would be better overall to probably try to break down Munguia, because he is a little bit taller and lengthier than you. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can't fight within the mid-range. Canelo is even great in the mid-range against fighters that are lengthier and bigger than him. But, at the end of the day, Munguia, he still is a threat, and he's decently powerful. So if Canelo finds himself getting a little bit too outworked within the mid-range, he's going to have to work in there with his jab, feint on Jaime Munguia, get in there with the right hand, start going to the body a little bit early, overall, and watch out for some of the shots that Munguia will throw in return. out of possible desperation. So these fighters, it's going to be very interesting, but I think that Canelo Alvarez is going to win it more than likely by unanimous decision. I'm going to predict that Canelo Alvarez wins this fight at least either 8 rounds to 4 or 9 rounds to 3. That's what I'm going to predict. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see where this goes.